Despite enormous opportunities to do business within Africa, every year the continent loses money to high trade costs. It takes Africa's top grocery chain an average of $20,000 per week to secure import permits to distribute goods in just one country. It takes the same company up to 1,600 documents to send one truck across a regional border. In Kinshasa, Brazzaville, predicted to become Africa's largest metropolitan area by 2025, fewer residents cross the border than those that crossed the Berlin Wall in 1988. The reason? The high cost of crossing the Congo River and shipping goods at the Malebo Pool. These two examples tell the same story. Despite claiming regional integration as a strategic objective, African countries have yet to reach their trade potential, particularly when it comes to trading with each other. Only 5% of Africa's grain imports, for example, come from regional resources.
We have this important rate of growth in the continent. But if we want it to become sustainable, we need, first of all, to boost intra-African trade. Africa do not trade with Africa, contrary to the rest of the region. Consider it as an element not only for growth, but also for development, to reduce poverty, to give employment to our youth.
Why aren't Africans being given the opportunity for cross-border trade? Because of non-tariff barriers like staggering transaction costs, complex immigration procedures, limited capacity of border officials, costly import and export licensing procedures, and a lack of investment in trade associations.
10% of Africa's trade is actually within Africa. Now, if you look at other regions within the European Union, for example, it stands at about 60%. Trade is actually an engine of growth. And if indeed Africa is to sustain the current growth momentum, which currently stands at more than 5%, we'll also need to ensure that we increase the volume of trade, within the continent.
High transportation costs and logistics also limit access to efficient transport services, especially in rural areas. Unclear policies also hamper traders. For instance, seeds released for sale in Kenya may sit stale at the border in Ethiopia because they don't satisfy local requirements. A trader may get his grain to the Tanzanian border only to find that a ban on exports has been recently imposed.
There are seasons when we have enough cereals or another agricultural products in one region when you find there is a shortage in another. But the transport costs are very high. But also where we may develop infrastructure to make sure that traffic can flow. For example, you go to borders, you delay in some of the borders, in some cases delaying for 3 days, 4 days to cross a border. And mind you, each day, transport is stuck at the border, waiting to cross. You add 1% of the value of the product. That is a cost that Africa cannot afford.
But what if African leaders committed to lowering barriers to the movement of goods, services, people, and even investments across borders? What if they implemented current policies and existing legislation that reduce the constraints faced by ordinary traders?
Africa at the moment is paying up to 40% extra on transport itself of the goods at the consumer end. When you look at these costs in the rest of the world, it is an average of 10%. So Africa remains ratchet uncompetitive, not for insurmountable reasons, but things that we can remove without any additional investment. The studies tell us that if we remove these barriers to trade, if we have these trade facilitation measures, we can have an additional up to $34 billion of additional trade annually.
It would mean that traders, like these women in DRC, could easily sell their goods across the border in Brazzaville without fear of harassment or bribery. This would help to bring Africa's booming informal trade into the formal economy. It's already happening in Senegal and Mali.
Pour faciliter les échanges entre le Mali et les pays de la sous-région, d'abord il y a l'intégration, comme je le disais tantôt, qui consiste à éliminer, voire à supprimer intégralement les barrières tarifaires. Aujourd'hui, le Mali a mis en œuvre une politique de désenclavement intérieur et extérieur qui fait que nous sommes reliés à la plupart des ports des pays voisins par des voies carrossables toute l'année, autrement dit des voies bitumées. Et deuxième aspect, le Mali a entrepris également un appui au secteur privé pour le renforcement de la logistique.
It would mean more doctors, lawyers, accountants, and other professionals could travel from country to country, offering consumers cheaper services and a wider variety of skills. It's already happening in Kenya.
One of the things that has happened in East Africa, which has made really business easier for us, is that they've been able to harmonize they're able to recognize the qualifications from each partner state. So if I'm an accountant in Kenya, they allow me to practice accounting in Burundi. I don't need to go sit for new exams. They see that my qualification in Kenya is good enough for qualification in Burundi or in Uganda or in Tanzania.
For business services such as ours in a law firm, the fact that now you can go to Rwanda without needing a work permit, and Burundi that's been signed and finished with and is being implemented, means services can move there more freer than it was before, which is of course a good and a great advantage for Kenya.
It would mean more jobs for Africa's 400 million young people, increased global competitiveness, and less reliance on struggling Western economies. And it could mean an end to food shortages across a region where hunger affects nearly 240 million people. The maize this miller in Mozambique imports from South Africa helps keep costs low for consumers in Maputo.
We get local maize and we also import maize from South Africa whenever the supplies from the local market are not enough for our milling needs. The imported maize comes through the rail or through bulk in trucks. For both these, it needs custom clearance.
To make these changes, it will take strong partnerships between countries and regional institutions. It will take a focus away from simply building roads to advancing the reforms that make it easier to travel them. But most of all, it will take a push from African leaders to take action on existing commitments, free up trade, reduce costs, and let Africa trade with Africa.